Naima was no more than 7 years old when her mother's body was taken away wrapped in woven mats, her face veiled by the same red cloth she used to tie around Naima's waist when she danced as a child. The village did not mourn loudly. Whispers rose like dust, hushed and careful. Her mother had been a healer, a woman of strange herbs and stranger songs, and while some came to her in secret for remedies or blessings, many others had always believed her ways were unnatural. So when she died suddenly, no one asked why. No one questioned the bruises beneath her eyes or the way her last scream seemed to echo through the baobab trees for days. Naima's stepmother, Malika, wore white to the funeral. Not in grief, but in triumph. With her sharp cheekbones and voice like dried papaya leaves crackling in the wind, Malika stepped in as Naima's only guardian. And from that day, silence wrapped itself around the girl's throat like a second skin. "You will not speak in public," Malika said the morning after the burial, pulling Naima's braids too tight as she combed her hair. "Your voice brings rot. Just like your mother's." Naima tried to speak then, to protest, to say it wasn't true, but her voice cracked like thunder in a dry sky. Malika slapped her cheek hard once and Naima swallowed her words forever. Word spread quickly, as it always did in villages built more from stories than stone. "The girl's tongue carries death," they said. "Her voice wilts leaves and withers yam." Some claimed they saw birds fall from trees when she sang to herself. Others insisted her mother's death was the price for opening her mouth too many times under a full moon. Even those who pitied the girl crossed the street when she passed. Naima stopped going to the market. When she fetched water from the well, the other women left. She walked with her head bowed, her lips tightly sealed. She only whispered to the stones under her bed, to the frogs in the garden, to the cracked mirror that once belonged to her mother. At night, she sang into her pillow voiceless songs that sounded more like breath than melody. Malika never beat her again. She didn't need to. The silence was punishment enough. What Malika did instead was worse. She erased Naima piece by piece. First, she burned her mother's clothes. Then her combs, her beads, the dried herbs still hidden in the kitchen walls. When Naima cried, Malika would laugh, saying, "Even your tears rot the ground." She would spit behind her left shoulder whenever Naima entered a room. There were days Naima thought her voice had truly cursed her life. That maybe her mother had sung too loudly, had spoken too bravely, and the world had swallowed her whole for it. So she trained herself to disappear, like the mist before sunrise. But silence has its own voice. It echoes where words cannot. In her quiet, Naima listened. She listened to the whisper of the firewood as it cracked. To the sighs of the earth as Malika tilled soil that no longer bloomed. To the wind humming names she had never spoken. She began to notice things others did not. How the hens laid fewer eggs when Malika sang. How a certain shadow lingered near the house long after sunset. How her reflection in the mirror sometimes smiled when she did not. And she remembered things, fragments of lullabies her mother once sang. The one about a well that swallowed secrets and a crown buried beneath water. The one about daughters who spoke through rain and ruled through silence. One night, when the moon rose full and unblinking, Naima woke to the sound of drums in the distance. Festival drums. The villagers danced around fire that night, a celebration of harvest, though the crops had failed again. Malika had not let Naima attend. But Naima crept to the window, heart fluttering. She mouthed the lyrics of an old festival song, though no sound left her lips. The reflection in the window moved before she did. She blinked, then stepped back. Her mother's face, younger, brighter, shadowed in silver, flickered for a breath before vanishing. The next morning, Malika found Naima tracing symbols into the dirt behind the house. Spirals. Waves. Naima didn't see her until it was too late. Malika grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her across the courtyard. "I warned you," she hissed, eyes wide. "I warned you what would happen if you kept stirring dead things." Naima didn't struggle. She only stared, her eyes holding the quiet fury of a storm that hasn't broken yet. That seemed to enrage Malika more. "You want to speak?" she shouted, shaking the girl. "Then speak to the dark." Naima was dragged past the chickens, past the tree stump where her mother once ground herbs, past the storage hut. To the old stone well behind the house, the one sealed for years, covered in vines. The one villagers said was cursed. Malika yanked off the cover. The smell of damp stone and old water rose to meet them. "You will live with your voice now," she snarled. Naima opened her mouth not to speak, but to scream. No sound came out. But the ground trembled faintly. Before she could run, Malika pushed. The world tilted. Naima fell. The cold swallowed her. Stones scraped her arms. Water rushed over her mouth. Her body hit the bottom hard. But the river didn't take her. The water, like before, held her gently. She didn't sink. She didn't drown. And in the dark, something rose from beneath her, slow, glowing. A golden shimmer swirled through the water. A circle. A crown. Naeema's fingers brushed it, and the moment she did, a voice bloomed in her throat like a trumpet flower in rain. She whispered her name. The water rippled with power. Above, Malika stepped back from the edge, unaware that silence was never weakness. It was waiting. Naeema sat by the old well again, her legs tucked beneath her as she traced the rim of the stone opening with her fingers. The world around her had learned to forget her voice, just as the stepmother had commanded. She had not spoken aloud in months. The villagers still exchanged glances when she passed by, children were ushered indoors and old women muttered prayers under their breath. Her silence had not softened their fears, only made them more distant, like ghosts avoiding another ghost. The well had long dried up, or so they believed. No one dared go near it. It had become one of those quiet places in the village people didn't talk about, like the hollow tree at the edge of the field or the burned house on the hill. But to Naeema it was warmth. The air around the stones was cool, a little damp even on the driest days, and sometimes when her tears touched the edge the wind would shift as though something below had sighed. She had first heard the whisper a few weeks after her mother's death. A voice like silk and wind, too quiet to make out words, but too persistent to be imagination. Every time she returned, the voice would be there again, sometimes stronger, sometimes faint. Always female. Always familiar. As if the well remembered her mother better than anyone else did. On this day the sun had set in angry orange, casting sharp shadows across the compound. Her chores were done, bruises hidden beneath her sleeves, and the stepmother was locked away inside with her sweet tea and sour secrets. Naeema sat at the well's edge, her cheek against the stone, and whispered the only word she dared allow herself anymore. Why? The wind stirred. Deep in the well there was a gurgle. It was soft but unmistakable. A sound no one had heard in decades. Water. She gasped silently and leaned closer. The shadows stretched longer. A glimmer of moisture clung to the stone now, dampening her fingers. Then a whisper, louder than before. Naeema. The voice said her name. She flinched and stumbled back, falling into the dust. Her eyes darted to the doorway of the house, half expecting her stepmother to burst out. But there was only stillness. Only the rustle of old leaves and the soft hum of something waking beneath the earth. Naeema crawled back toward the well, this time placing her hand over the stone and closing her eyes. The voice came again, gentler now. Come back. Don't be afraid. I remember you. The words weren't her imagination. They came with warmth, with something like love. The voice did not sound like her mother's, but it carried the same strength, and the same pain. Naeema opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. It was not fear holding them back but the habit of silence. She had buried her voice so deep inside that it felt dangerous to dig it out. The next day she returned again. And again. Each time the voice grew clearer. The whispers became words. The words became lullabies. The lullabies told stories of old queens and buried daughters, of thrones made from stone and tears. Of women who had been silenced before and what rose up when their cries were finally heard. Naeema began to dream of water. Not just any water, but thick, shimmering waves that climbed upward, defying gravity, wrapping around her like arms. In the dreams she was never drowning. She was always rising. Then one morning the stepmother began to watch. Naeema didn't notice at first. She sat at the well as always, speaking softly to the stone, tracing the places where moss had begun to return. But behind the cracked window 2 eyes glinted, sharp and suspicious. The woman watched her stepdaughter with a stillness too intentional to be casual. Her mouth tightened when she saw Naeema smile faintly. The girl had no one to smile with. No one to listen. Yet here she was, whispering to dirt and stone like a witch child. The next day the stepmother followed. She pretended to go to the market but hid among the maize stalks, her feet silent against the earth. She watched Naeema walk straight to the well, watched the girl press her palms to the stone, and tilt her head like she was listening. She saw the shimmer of water creep up the inside of the well. And she saw Naeema smile. That night, she confronted the girl with fury in her eyes and poison on her tongue. What are you doing at that cursed place? You think I don't see you? Talking to spirits? Summoning demons? She struck Naeema hard and the girl didn't cry out. That enraged her even more. Say something. Curse me. Go ahead. Isn't that what your voice does? But Naeema only stared. Her silence wrapped around her like armor now. The voice in the well had told her the truth, that silence wasn't weakness. It was memory waiting to be spoken at the right time. The stepmother's rage turned cold the next day. Cold like calculation. She began asking the neighbors if they'd heard strange things. She told them she'd seen water in the well again. She told them Naima might be cursed, or worse chosen. The village didn't know what to do with such talk. Most avoided confrontation. But rumors spread, like wind-borne ash, quiet but impossible to stop. Then one evening, Naima returned to the well to find a small silver trinket placed on its edge. It was a locket, her mother's. Inside was a curl of her own baby hair, still wrapped in dried petals. It had vanished after her mother's death. The stepmother had stolen it. Now she returned it. Naima stared at it, and for the first time, her voice cracked free from her chest in a single word, "Why?" Behind her, the stepmother spoke, not loudly but with purpose. "Because I warned you to stay silent. And now they will see what happens when you wake things that should stay buried." That night, while Naima slept, the stepmother poured salt and ash into the well. She recited words she barely understood, words she'd stolen from her own grandmother's deathbed. Words of sealing, of silencing. But the river under the earth was older than her spells. The whispers stopped for a day. Maybe two. Then, on the third morning, Naima went to the well and laid her hand on the stone. It was warm. The air above it shimmered. And then, a single droplet of water lifted, floated upward like it had forgotten gravity, and touched her palm. The whispers came back like a storm. They called her name. They sang her truth. And deep below the ground something began to move. A pulse. A promise. The well would not stay silent much longer. The wind screamed louder than it had in seasons, hurling itself against the roofs of the village and pulling at the thatched walls like it sought entry. The sky hung low and heavy, bruised with the promise of something more than rain. In the stepmother's house, the storm echoed like footsteps in the rafters. Naima sat in the corner by the hearth, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her voice sealed in the silence that had been forced upon her since her mother's death. The stepmother paced across the room, her face half lit by the flickering light of the hearth, and shadowed by the fury of her own thoughts. Naima had heard her muttering to herself all day, about crops failing, about the whispers of the villagers, about her own fear of Naima's eyes that glowed faintly like embers under dusk. The more the sky darkened, the more the stepmother's fury bloomed. "You were born to ruin," the woman hissed, not for the first time. "Your mother cursed me when she birthed you." Naima didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that fear made the blows worse. Her silence was her shield, and her voice, once bright as river water, was the thing she had tucked deep within herself, away from cruel ears. Thunder cracked so near it shook the pots off the walls. That was when the stepmother moved. "Come," she said, voice like dry grass snapping. Naima looked up, confusion furrowing her brow. No food in hand. No bucket. No cloak for the rain. Just the woman's hand outstretched, her nails dirt-stained, her fingers trembling. Naima hesitated, but then stood. She had no choice. There never was one. The storm outside was a beast untethered. Rain lashed at them from all sides as they hurried down the path away from the village, toward the grove where the trees grew too close and the grass forgot the sun. The stepmother said nothing. She only dragged Naima forward with a grip that burned. Naima's bare feet slipped on mud. Thorns tore at her arms. She felt as though the storm was trying to scream for her, to cry out what her tongue could not. They reached the old well. It stood, as it always had, like a broken throat in the middle of the earth, dry for decades, its stones worn smooth by time. A lid now lay beside it, a heavy round slab of wood Naima had never seen there before. And then she knew. The truth came colder than the rain. The stepmother had prepared this. She tried to speak, to plead, but only a whisper came. Her voice cracked like a matchstick, dying before it caught. No more lies. No more strange water rising when you weep. No more wind stilling when you sing in your sleep, the stepmother snarled. You were never meant to live. You are not right. Not human. Naima shook her head. Her lips moved, but the words would not form. She tried to run, but the mud betrayed her. The stepmother shoved her. Art. Naima fell backwards into the dark. The well swallowed her. The fall was longer than it should have been. It was not a pit, but a tunnel, a mouth with a throat that twisted and turned. The stones passed in flashes. Then water. Cold. So. She sank. Her screams bubbled out, unheard. But she did not fight. Somewhere inside her, she remembered, this water had spoken to her once. She let it take her. Above, the lid slammed shut. Darkness. Rain pounding from above. Water rising. But this water was not drowning her. It held her. It was warm. Naima opened her eyes beneath the surface. The water shimmered faintly like light beneath skin. She drifted there, suspended between breath and silence. And then she heard them. Voices. Faint. Gentle. From the walls of the well. From the stones. From the water itself. They called her name. Not Naima, in the tongue of her village, but another name. Older. Smoother. Like silk pulled over stone. The name didn't just ring in her ears, it echoed in her chest. She opened her mouth, and the name poured out of her like a song. With it came the light. Her body glowed in the water. Her limbs softened like reeds swaying under the river's surface. Her hair spread like kelp. And around her head, the water began to twist, forming shapes circling her brow, whispering. The memory of her mother's lullabies returned, not as sound but as warmth on her skin. She saw her mother's face now, not the blurred shadow the stepmother had painted, but clear, strong, with a crescent scar on her brow and a song in her throat. You carry the river's name, her mother had once said. It will protect you when nothing else will. The water stirred again. Naima felt herself rising, though her limbs didn't move. The well pulsed. Outside, the rain poured heavier. The earth shuddered. Thunder roared again, but this time, the sound seemed to come from within the well itself, as if the stones were angry. She broke the surface, gasping not for breath, but for the air she had been denied for too long. Her hands grabbed at the slick sides. The wood above creaked. But she could feel it, the water now obeyed her. She sang, a single note, low and shivering. The lid cracked. Above, the stepmother was still there, crouching in the trees, eyes wide with fear. She had heard the sound. She saw the light rising from the cracks in the wood. She scrambled forward, reaching for the lid. But before her hands could press it down again, the lid exploded, water shooting up like a geyser, lifting Naima into the air. She hovered there, suspended above the well. The rain stopped. The clouds parted in a circle above her, like a crown of moonlight. And there, around her brow, the water solidified, a coronet of glistening droplets that did not fall. The stepmother stumbled back, shrieking. You were supposed to drown. Naima landed gently on the grass. Her feet left no mark in the mud. Her eyes glowed with the memory of rivers. Her voice, long suppressed, returned in full. I am the daughter of the deep. And you who silenced me will hear every word. She did not raise her hand. She did not cast a curse. She simply walked past the woman, who fell to her knees, sobbing in terror, forgotten by the storm she once commanded. Naima walked back through the grove toward the village, the water still singing behind her. Flowers bloomed where her feet touched. The rain did not follow. From the well, a new stream bubbled, fresh, clear, singing. It would be said for generations that the well had once taken a child and given back a queen, and that no lock, no lid, and no lie could ever silence her again. Naima felt her lungs bursting as the darkness of the well gave way to something deeper, something older than earth. She expected death, stone, and silence. But as her body slipped further down, instead of hitting the cold bottom, she felt water catch her like soft hands. She did not drown. She drifted. She opened her eyes to a strange shimmer that defied logic. Light moved beneath the surface as though the moon had sunken into this world. Her limbs floated without resistance. The pressure on her chest loosened. She breathed, not air but something between breath and memory. Around her, the water glowed with silver-blue hues, flickering like candlelight, not from above but from within. Then shapes emerged. They were not fish, not shadows. They were women. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Floating, walking, standing upright on invisible floors beneath the surface. Each one wore a crown, not of gold but of strange elements. Coral, bone, polished obsidian, moonlit shells, vines, and braided riverweed. They did not blink. They did not frown. They stared at Naima with sorrowful reverence. One woman, taller than the rest, stepped forward. Her gown flowed like water made of stars. Her eyes were the same shade as the deep night sea. She extended a hand, and without speaking, Naima felt her voice inside her mind. Welcome, chosen drop. Naima tried to respond, but her voice felt caught behind years of silence. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. The tall woman smiled, not with joy but understanding. You have not forgotten your voice. You were told to fear it. That ends here. Naima's heart pounded. She looked around. More women circled her now, forming a great ring of light in the watery depths. Some looked as young as her. Others bore the wisdom of centuries in their eyes. Many held scars. One had no hands. Another's throat glowed where it had been cut. They were beautiful, terrible, powerful. "Who are you?" Naima whispered, but the sound barely escaped. The tall woman heard it anyway. "We are the ones thrown away," she said. "Daughters who were buried in silence. Queens never crowned. Voices buried beneath stone and shame. But the water keeps our names. And now it brings you." Naima's feet touched something firm beneath her, not ground but solid water, thick and clear. She stood. Her clothes no longer clung wetly to her skin. A gown had formed, soft, shifting like a stream, layered with silver leaf patterns and blues that deepened with every heartbeat. "I don't belong here," Naima whispered. "I'm just a girl." The tall woman tilted her head. "That's what they told all of us." Another voice spoke from Naima's left, a woman with hair like black rope and a coral crown that curled around her temples. "You are the drop we've waited for. The well chose you." The rain answered. "And now we rise." Naima shook her head. "Rise to where?" "To memory. To justice," said the tall woman. "To truth." Naima felt dizzy. Her mind tried to make sense of it all, of the storm, the fall, the well. Her stepmother's face flashed in her memory, twisted with contempt, triumphant as she shoved the lid over her screams. That last moment, her fear, her helplessness, was still lodged in her chest like a splinter. "She locked me in there," Naima whispered. "She said I was cursed." A ripple passed through the circle. The women around her shared glances, sorrow, rage, knowing. "She feared you," one said. "They always do," said another. The tall woman raised her hand, and the water around them shifted, revealing visions like mist in glass. Naima saw scenes form in the currents. A girl pushed into a river by a jealous ant, a newborn tied to a rock at low tide, a teenage girl drowned in a barrel for singing during the harvest. Their mouths had been closed, their names erased, but the water remembered. "The well connects to the river of buried truths," the tall woman said. "Its flow runs under every house where a girl was silenced. You, Naima, were not meant to die. You were meant to awaken." Naima felt heat rising in her, not fire but something deeper. It was the same warmth that once swelled in her chest when she sang to herself in hiding. That day long ago when her voice made the withered flower bloom. That was not a curse. It had been her power, her gift, and they made her ashamed of it. "Why me?" she asked. "Why now?" The coral-crowned woman stepped forward. "Because you still wept. Your sorrow called the rain. You awakened the oldest magic. That night, the water rose not to drown you, but to crown you." The tall woman raised both arms, and the floor of water beneath them opened like a blooming flower. A throne emerged, made of pearl and petrified wood. Around it swirled broken crowns, drifting in soft circles. Naima stepped back. "I can't sit there. I'm not royal." A voice behind her answered, sharp and clear, "Queens are not born with crowns. They're born with wounds." Naima turned. Another spirit had arrived, this one older, with silver tears etched on her cheeks. "We were all once just girls in pain. Then pain became memory. Memory became voice. Voice became water. And now you." The women began to hum, not words but tones so resonant they rippled through Naima's bones. The throne pulsed with light. The water darkened, then brightened. Naima hesitated. Then she stepped forward. With each step, memories rushed into her. Her mother's laughter, soft and fleeting. The feel of her stepmother's nails digging into her shoulder. The quiet hours near the well where she felt most herself. Her entire life rose around her in waves, and yet, instead of drowning, she breathed it in. She reached the throne. As she sat, a current lifted her hair. A crown rose from the water, carved from the same wood as the well's lid, transformed now by the river's touch. It hovered, then gently lowered onto her head. The humming stopped. The tall woman knelt. One by one the others followed. Naima's heart thundered. She did not feel like a girl anymore. She did not feel like a victim. She felt vast. Alive. "What do I do now?" she asked. The tall woman lifted her gaze. "You rise." The throne melted into water again and the realm dimmed. The women began to drift backward, fading like mist into waves. One by one their crowns dissolved, but not in loss. In release. Naima stood. The gown of river light shimmered around her. A path opened through the water, upward toward the world above. But before she left, the tall woman spoke one last time. "Remember, they will fear your voice. Not because it curses, but because it commands. Speak, sing, cry. and you will never be alone again. We rise with you." Naima nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek, but as it fell, it became a droplet of silver, absorbed by the current. Then she rose. The water carried her upward, the path glowing brighter with every breath. The surface shimmered like a mirror made of moonlight. As she reached it, her gown dissolved into mist, but the crown remained. Her feet touched stone. Her body was dry. Her voice, clear. She stood alone inside the well. Above her, the lid had been blown off. The sky was no longer storming, it was eerily calm, the moon full and watching. Around her, faint voices echoed, not from the past but from within. She placed a hand to her chest. The heartbeat she felt was not just her own. It belonged to all of them. Naima floated in the blue dark of the well, her limbs weightless, her voice silent. The water was cool but not cold, cradling her like a womb. Above, she could barely see the outline of the sealed lid, a faint round of darkness pressed against a fading sky. Below, only depth and shimmer as if the water stretched forever. But what pulsed most was the glow beneath her, where something ancient waited. She closed her eyes. The songs had begun gently. Humming really, like the wind through reeds or breath against stone. The women in the water realm did not speak often with mouths, but with vibrations, melodies that carried meaning deeper than words. They had not rushed her. They had gathered around her in silence at first, their crowns of coral and moonlight reflecting the silver movements of fish and memory. Then one had reached out, not to touch but to hum beside her. A note long and low. Another joined. A third layered above. Naima didn't know when she began to hum back, but she did. The note came from inside her chest, from the hollow space where fear once lived. Each day, if time could be counted in the eternal tide below, the songs grew clearer. They were not songs of revenge. They were songs of origin. The women sang of daughters thrown away, of voices crushed before they could bloom, of beauty mistaken for rebellion. They sang of rivers that wept for the silenced, of winds that remembered names no one spoke aloud. And they sang of her, the girl in the well, though they had never known her name before. The chosen drop, they called her, always in unison, always with reverence. Naima listened more than she spoke. She was used to silence. But here, silence was not punishment, it was patience. Silence made space for truth to swell. When she finally sang back, her voice cracked, thin and hesitant. Still the waters responded. A soft glow shimmered at her feet. Each note she released caused a ripple, and in that ripple she began to feel weight again, but not heaviness. Purpose. The first full verse she learned came from an elder queen whose hair drifted around her like kelp. "Speak only when your spirit stirs, and even the stones will bend to listen." Naima repeated the line until her voice no longer shook. When she opened her mouth and sang it in full, she rose. Not high, just enough to notice. The next verse came from a queen with golden fins along her arms. "If they tell you silence is safety, drown their lies in the thunder of your name." That verse made the water tremble. A current lifted Naima toward the lid again. She could feel the pull, not from her body but from the crown resting at the bottom of the well. It glowed now with a heartbeat, pulsing once for every truth she remembered. And when she glanced downward, the light from it seemed to reach for her like fingers made of flame and water. The queens taught her not just songs but meaning. One melody taught her to remember her mother's hands, how they used to cup her face and smooth her curls. Another showed her the day her stepmother first struck her, and how the river outside the village had risen a little too fast that year. With each memory recovered, she sang it aloud and the water answered. It was not always gentle. Sometimes the verses hurt. Sometimes they brought such sorrow Naima thought she would sink again. But always, the water caught her. She discovered her voice was not delicate. It was carved by loss, yes, but that gave it shape. And the more she used it, the more she could shape the space around her. At times, the well disappeared and she stood in halls of submerged glass, hearing songs echo through the bones of the earth. Other times, she swam beside shadows, daughters who had not yet remembered their names, teaching them the words that had lifted her. She learned she was not the first to fall. But maybe she could be the last. The crown below grew warmer. One night, if it could be called night, Naima dreamed of the village above. In the dream the crops were withered. The stepmother stood before the well, her hands red with scratches, as if something from below had tried to claw its way out. The villagers stared at her with uneasy eyes. Whispers. Fear. Then the dream shifted and the well cracked open like an egg. Water burst from it, not in fury but in radiant waves. Naima rose from it in silence. And when she spoke her first word, the sky bowed low. She woke from the dream humming a new tune. One she hadn't been taught, one she had made. And when she sang it aloud, the well around her shimmered gold. The crown lifted. It did not float to her. It did not place itself on her brow. It waited. The queens formed a circle around her. One stepped forward, the oldest. Her crown was not made of coral, but of stone and starlight. Only you can wear it, she sang, if you carry not just pain, but the power to forgive. Naima closed her eyes again. She thought of her stepmother. Of the villagers who looked away. Of the silence that had been forced upon her since birth. And still she did not want revenge. She wanted voice. She wanted to rise. She sang one final verse, not old, not borrowed, but hers. I am the daughter who did not drown. I am the voice from the well. I rise not to rule, but to remind. Silence has a sound. And now you will hear it. The crown lifted, spinning gently before resting just above her curls. As it touched her, the water surged upward. The lid above groaned. Cracks formed in the stone. Sunlight poured through in slivers. The water glowed, not just with magic but with memory. With all the songs that had ever been silenced. Naima looked up. She did not climb. She rose. Naima stood knee-deep in the water that had lifted her from the underworld. Her gown, spun from woven reeds and starlight, clung to her skin like second flesh. Her hair shimmered with a strange radiance, not of moonlight nor fire, but of something older, water that remembered. The village she once knew had changed in her absence, though the houses remained crooked and the people wore the same suspicion in their eyes. But they gathered now, drawn by the overflowing well that had not breathed water in decades. The stepmother, who had once chained Naima's tongue with shame and buried her beneath stone and silence, stood frozen near the edge of the crowd. She held a woven shawl to her chest like a shield, eyes darting between the girl and the rising water. But Naima wasn't the girl anymore. Her body had changed, taller, steadier, as if time had passed differently beneath the surface. Her face bore the same quiet grace, but now it held something else too, the echo of deep song and a fury shaped into forgiveness. A silence heavier than any scream fell over the village square. No one dared move. The wind held its breath. Naima took one step forward. The water followed. It sloshed and spilled out of the well with each of her steps, snaking across the stone paths like it had chosen her shadow as its master. Villagers gasped as the tide brushed their feet, warm and alive, smelling not of rot but of renewal. Mothers held their children back. Elders squinted, uncertain whether this was miracle or omen. Then the stepmother turned to run. Her foot hit the mud, but it sank deeper than it should have. She stumbled, screamed, and fell forward. She tried to pull herself up, but her fingers clawed only soft earth, and it refused to let go. The ground beneath her seemed to rot with every breath, turning black and pulpy. Vines sprouted like veins, binding her wrists and ankles as if the land itself had finally decided it had no place for her anymore. Naima did not speak. She did not have to. The stepmother wailed, "It's her. She's cursed." But her voice cracked like dry clay. Her accusations no longer stuck. The villagers watched, wide-eyed, as Naima stepped closer. A child, barely 6, pointed and whispered, "She's singing without sound." It was true. Naima's lips moved gently, and though no one heard the words, they felt them, like the tug of the tide in their chest, the pulse of old rivers in their bones. Her song spoke of daughters drowned in grief, of voices stolen, of thrones built on forgotten names. It told of love that flowed like water, always finding a way back no matter how many stones blocked the path. The sky above darkened, not with clouds, but with a blue so deep it seemed to press down. Yet rain did not fall. Only light, shimmering lines like threads of moon silk descended from above, weaving around Naima, lifting her hair, making her crown gleam brighter with each breath. The stepmother, now halfway consumed by the earth, begged, "Forgive me. I was afraid. I was afraid of what you'd become." Naima finally spoke aloud. Her voice was not loud, but it echoed through the chest and into the marrow. "You were right to fear me. Not because I bring ruin, but because I bring remembrance." The vines twisted tighter. The ground beneath the stepmother cracked. Then quietly it swallowed her whole. No blood. No scream. Only silence. Then the water receded. As it slithered back to the well, it left behind new shoots of green along the path, life growing where death had walked. The village square, once cracked and dull, shimmered with dew. The air smelled of myrrh and moss. People began to kneel, not in submission but in awe. They had forgotten what power truly looked like. And now it stood before them, barefoot, wrapped in waterlight, crowned by fate. Naima turned to them and said, "You may not understand what I am. But you will remember who I was." An old woman, her hands shaking, stepped forward. "Naima," she said. "Your mother, she was like this too. Before." Naima nodded. "I know. I remember her songs now." Another woman stepped forward, tears streaming. "We were told your voice cursed our crops, but they failed even when you were gone. We blamed you. It was easier than blaming truth." Naima knelt beside her and touched the woman's hand. "Then let truth water the fields." From where her hand rested on the earth, a stream of water rose, clear and cool. It snaked into the dry patches of land surrounding the village and disappeared underground. Moments later, green shoots broke through the soil. Gasps rose from the people. Some wept openly. Others simply stared. Naima stood. The water that had crowned her now circled her feet like a loyal pet. She turned and walked toward the well, but instead of descending again, she laid her palm on its rim. "This well is no longer a prison," she said. "It is a throne." The villagers watched in stunned silence as the stones of the well shifted, reshaped, rising taller, smoother, forming an altar. On its crown, the faint shimmer of Naima's coral crown rested, pulsing with gentle light. By nightfall, the story had already begun to change. Not the tale of a cursed girl, but the birth of a queen born from silence. Not the fear of a voice but the reverence of one. Naima did not demand loyalty. She asked only for memory. The kind that flows like water and refuses to dry. And that night, as the stars blinked open and the winds danced through the trees, the villagers gathered around the well altar. They lit no torches for they needed no flame. The glow from within the stones, and from Naima herself, was enough. The stepmother's name was never spoken again. But Naima's songs were sung by every girl who had ever been told to be quiet. And every time the crops rose from the fields it was said, "The water remembers." The village stood in a hush that made the wind itself feel like an intruder. All around Naima, people stared, many for the first time without contempt. Mothers clutched their children, elders leaned forward with uncertain eyes, and even the birds paused in the trees, feathers trembling with the tension that clung to the air. She stood tall, water still dripping from her robes, her hair aglow with threads of silver like starlight woven into every strand. Her eyes, once dimmed by silence, now held the calm weight of oceans. The villagers had seen her rise from the well that no one returned from. They had seen the earth swallow her stepmother without warning. But belief, real belief, still hung in the air like a question not yet answered. The eldest of the village, bent with years and rumors, stepped forward holding a staff carved with the faces of ancestors. His voice was steady but unsure. "If the waters raised you and if the well did not keep you," he said, "then show us who you are. Speak." A murmur passed through the crowd like the ripple before a storm. Naima did not flinch. She looked at her hands, still calloused from work she never chose. She glanced up at the sky, heavy with pregnant clouds. And she remembered. She remembered the first time her stepmother struck her for speaking when guests arrived. The way the villagers stopped buying their vegetables, whispering that her voice soured the seeds. She remembered hiding behind market stalls, covering her mouth whenever she felt laughter rising in her throat. And she remembered the taste of the well, stone and betrayal and a silence so thick it wrapped around her lungs. But she also remembered the voices beneath the water. The discarded queens who had cupped her chin in their hands and whispered songs older than this soil. She remembered the crown that rose to meet her, not because she demanded it, but because she had endured. So now she parted her lips. The moment she did, the air seemed to shudder. No words came yet, just breath. A single inhale. But the sky responded. The rain that had begun to fall with timid drops suddenly froze midair, droplets suspended like glass beads strung across the village. Gasps echoed. Children reached out to touch them and the droplets moved away, hovering just beyond skin. Naima stepped forward and opened her mouth again. This time, a single note emerged, clear and smooth like wind chimes caught in moonlight. And as she sang, the clouds began to drift apart in circles, parting not with violence but reverence. Her song wasn't loud. It didn't demand to be heard. It was soft, like a lullaby hummed in a cradle of roots. But the soil listened. The sky listened. And deep beneath their feet, something ancient turned its face toward the sound. Where she had once knelt and cried years ago, near the marketplace fountain, the ground cracked with light. A small green stem pushed through the dirt. Then another. And another. Gasps became sobs. Before the eyes of the village, a tree rose, growing in real time, its bark a deep blue-gray like river stone, its leaves shaped like tongues, each one whispering softly in the wind. It grew until its branches stretched over Naima, shading her like a guardian. Birds flocked to it, nestling without fear. Then Naima stopped. The droplets of rain that had been frozen in the air fell again, but not as water. They turned to petals. Pale and glowing, like the crown she'd left behind in the deep. Petals that kissed cheeks and hair, soaking no one. She looked at the elder still gripping his staff. He dropped to one knee without hesitation. "Your voice is not a curse," he whispered. "It is what heals what we have broken." One by one others knelt. The butcher's wife who once scolded Naima for stepping near her garden. The potter's son who used to throw pebbles and mimic her silence with cruel smiles. Even those who had never known her name whispered it now with reverence. Naima did not smile. This was not triumph. It was return. She stepped forward, laying her palm against the new tree's trunk. "This is not my revenge," she said quietly. "This is your reminder. No one thrown into silence remains forgotten. The waters remember. The roots remember. And I remember." From somewhere deep in the woods, the wind answered her. And the well, long feared and often avoided, now shimmered in the distance, no longer dry but full. Not just with water but with memory, with strength and with songs yet to be sung. The petals continued to fall. And Naima stood in their center, not as a ghost of a girl once buried in stone, but as the first voice in a village that had forgotten how to listen. The rains had not stopped since Naima's return. But they were no longer violent. They came in waves of rhythm, like a song humming through the earth. Every drop that fell seemed to follow her, reverent and sure, as if recognizing their kin. The village didn't fear the flood, not anymore. They watched, waited, breath held in collective awe, knowing something ancient was coming. One morning, just before the sun could pierce the clouds, the well began to tremble. It didn't crack or shatter. It opened, like a mouth releasing a secret. Water surged upward, not in fury but in procession, as if something sacred had been waiting at the bottom for far too long. From the heart of the rising flood, a glimmer emerged. It floated gently to the surface, not heavy with gold or crusted with jewels, but forged of flowing silver, its band shaped like ripples, its peaks crowned with river stone and bits of pearl that shimmered like moonlight. The villagers saw it before Naima did. They gasped, their voices hushed like they were witnessing a birth. The crown did not sink. It did not drift away. It floated directly to her feet, cradled by the water that obeyed no current but hers. Naima did not reach for it immediately. She stood there, barefoot in the water, her reflection fractured by light and ripple. The crown waited. Silent. Patient. She knew what it was, not a gift, not a prize but a reminder. A memory formed into metal. A promise made flesh. She knelt slowly, fingers brushing its surface. The moment she touched it, the well behind her erupted, not in destruction but in transformation. Water spilled from its edges in streams that glowed faintly blue, and every rivulet that touched the ground carved new paths through the village. The villagers followed its course, stunned. The rivers were rewriting the land. One branch of the water moved directly through the fields where crops had once failed. Another turned toward the broken market stalls, cleansing the dirt and old rot. But one stream, the brightest, the loudest, turned toward Naima's old home. Her mother's home. The house stood still at first, unchanged. But the moment the water touched its threshold, it began to creak and groan. The walls sweated with old grief, the windows wept with fog, and the doors shook on their hinges as though trying to speak. Inside, the stepmother hid. She had not left the house since Naima's return. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone. The moment she saw Naima rise from the well, she had locked herself in, muttering nonsense, clutching her rosaries and dried herbs that no longer held power. Her eyes were hollow, her breath shallow. She had seen miracles and knew they had not come for her. When the water reached the doorstep, she screamed. But there was no one left to save her. No false friends. No husband. No gods that answered guilt. Only the flood, ancient, knowing, and just. The water moved like a hand, slipping beneath the door, creeping along the floorboards. The woman climbed onto the table, then the bed, shouting Naima's name in anger, in panic, in hollow apology. But Naima had not moved. She watched from the path, crown in hand, her face unreadable. Inside, the stepmother's voice cracked as the water touched her feet. She tried to climb higher, onto shelves, into rafters, but no surface offered safety. The floorboards groaned and the water thickened, no longer clear but dark like soil soaked in memory. It swallowed her ankles, her calves, her knees. She shrieked until her voice broke, cursing the girl, the house, the heavens. The mud began to form around her legs, thick and tight like fists. And then, as if the land had decided it had heard enough, it pulled. She fell. She reached for walls, for wood, for anything, but everything slipped from her fingers like smoke. The mud swallowed her waist, her chest. Her arms thrashed wildly, but the water climbed higher, more determined than her desperation. Then she went silent. The last thing the villagers saw through the crumbling doorframe was her mouth, open in a scream too late to matter before the earth took her whole. The house shuddered once and collapsed inward, not like a building breaking but like a wound healing over itself. The river ran directly through the ruins now, cool and bright. Nothing of her remained. Naima stood still, the crown now held to her chest. Villagers watched, unsure what to do, whether to celebrate, to grieve, or simply to kneel again. But Naima turned and walked toward the water, barefoot, robes soaked, eyes soft. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The river spoke for her. It whispered through the fields. It hummed through the homes. It sang through the bones of the village and told every stone, every seed, every bird. She had returned. She was chosen. She was no longer beneath anyone's feet. At the center of the village, where the new tree had grown from her silence, Naima stood beneath its shade and placed the crown upon her head. It did not shimmer. It glowed. And the river knelt. The moon bloomed full and silver above the village once again, casting its light like a veil across the fields. The rains had long subsided, but their memory lived in every green sprout that reached up from the earth. The well, once a tomb, now shimmered like a sacred pool, its surface calm and deep, reflecting stars as if they were offerings. And there, as she had each moon since the flood, stood Naima. She no longer wore the crown on her head during these nights. It sat beside her on a smooth stone, never tarnishing, never dull. Instead, she wore white, a simple robe made from woven rivergrass and silk thread, flowing with her movements as though part of the water itself. Her hair, once matted with dust and shame, now fell in heavy coils down her back, adorned with blue shells and tiny bells that chimed with the breeze. She sang. Not a song with words, not the songs of morning she once whispered in the dark, but a song of water and memory. A melody only the well could understand. Her voice rose like mist, soft and slow, wrapping around the village like a second sky. The sound made leaves shiver, dogs go quiet, and babies stop crying. It made men lower their heads and old women weep. At the well's edge, small bundles began to appear. They came silently, wrapped in cloth, placed gently on the rocks, never touched by Naima's hands. First it was just one girl. A small child no older than 7, her wrists bruised, her voice shy. She placed a comb carved from bone. Then another girl came a moon later, limping with a missing tooth and tears still wet on her cheeks. She placed her doll's broken arm beside the comb. Soon they came in groups. Girls with shadows under their eyes. Girls whose names had been spat instead of sung. Girls with bare feet, crooked braids, and hearts full of silence. Each came with an offering, a bead, a ribbon, a page torn from a book, a shard of mirror, a necklace once ripped from their throats. They never spoke when they came. They only listened to Naima's song, knelt, and left what they no longer needed. And each time the well would respond. The water would rise, not to flood, not to punish, but to shimmer. Just enough to touch the gifts, to wash them in memory and strength, and then pull them gently into its depth, like a grandmother gathering scattered pieces of her children. The villagers began to whisper. They whispered not out of fear anymore but out of reverence. The same mouths that once called Naima cursed now called her sacred. The same eyes that turned away from her now followed her with awe. Still, she never returned to her old house. She never stepped into the market or joined their celebrations. She belonged to the well now, and perhaps, to something older than any of them. The children started repeating a saying, one born from a mother's hushed warnings and elders' folded wisdom. Beware those who bury daughters, for water remembers. The saying caught like wildfire. It spread from home to home, whispered behind locked doors, embroidered onto shawls, etched into the handles of water jugs. Even the men began to walk more softly, speak more carefully to their daughters, as if afraid the well might be listening, which it was. One night an elder approached Naima. He was not the chief. That man had fallen ill the day of the flood and never fully recovered. This one was older still, bent like a question, with skin the color of river bark and eyes milky with years. He came with no arrogance, no blessing. Only a question. Are you a queen now? Naima turned, her song paused mid-breath. I am what they tried to sink. The old man nodded slowly. And yet here you are. Singing. She looked to the water then back to him. Queens don't rise because they are given crowns. They rise because they survive the drowning. The elders smiled a toothless smile. Then we have many queens yet to come. And they did. With each moon more girls arrived. Not just from their village but from neighboring ones, some even from across the river. The well had become a sanctuary. Some came not to give but to ask. They would whisper their wishes into the water, and though it did not always answer, they left lighter, straighter, stronger. Naima never promised healing. She only offered witness. The land responded in kind. Where the old house had once stood, flowers now grew wildly, vines climbing through the bones of its ruin, blooming with petals shaped like little tongues. A cruel joke from the earth, perhaps, or a final word. The mud that had swallowed her stepmother remained untouched. No one dared build on it. The village changed. Girls were taught differently. Their names were sung louder. Their silences were no longer ignored. Even the moon seemed brighter when it passed over the well, its reflection stretching long into the night. And on one moonlit evening, as Naima finished her song, a girl no older than 12 placed a tiny scroll at the water's edge. It was written in trembling hand. "I was buried too. But I heard you singing and I came back." Naima's fingers brushed the scroll. The water shimmered. And from the depths of the well, a single blue flower rose to the surface, untouched by mud, glowing softly. She tucked it behind her ear, tears shining like stars in her eyes. And then she sang again. Not for herself, but for every girl who had ever been silenced. Every daughter thrown into the dark. Every queen still waiting at the bottom of a well. And the village listened. Because they knew now more than ever, queens never sink.